Typhoon Haiyan is 375 miles wide, one of the strongest storms ever to make landfall.
This storm is Sandy size in width. This is the entire country of the Philippines. And so there's a lot of bubble here. There's a lot of water under this storm. There's going to be storm surge, 50, maybe 60 feet.
November 8th, 2013, 6:40 in the morning. The sun has barely risen over Tacloban City when the ocean begins to move inland. Not in waves, in walls. A surge of seawater, in some places more than 6 meters high, swallows entire neighborhoods in minutes. People who thought they were safe on the second floor of their homes are suddenly underwater. Streets become rivers. Rivers become the sea. And somewhere above it all, a typhoon with sustained winds of 315 kilometers per hour is still tearing through the island of Light. By the time the storm passes, more than 6,000 people will be dead. Hundreds of thousands will have nothing left, and the Philippines will never look at a typhoon the same way again. Tacloban City, a bustling port city of roughly 220,000 people on the eastern coast of Light Island, the kind of city built around the sea. Fishermen who left before dawn and came back by noon. Markets loud with vendors. Children playing on streets that ran down to the waterfront. The ocean was not something to fear, it was something to live beside. The Philippines sits in one of the most active typhoon corridors on Earth. More than 20 tropical cyclones enter or form inside the Philippine area of responsibility every year. Tacloban had survived typhoons before. Residents knew the routine. Board the windows, stock the rice, wait for the all clear. But no routine could have prepared them for what was coming from the Pacific. Meteorologists had been watching the storm for days. What began as a tropical disturbance in the open Pacific rapidly organized into something exceptional. By November 7th, Haiyan had intensified into a super typhoon. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center recorded sustained winds of 315 kilometers per hour, with gusts approaching 380, numbers that had rarely been seen in recorded history. The Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration issued warnings. Signal number 4, the highest level, was raised over several provinces. Evacuation orders went out, but the warnings struggled to reach everyone. And for many who heard them, the true scale of what was coming was almost impossible to imagine. The Philippines had been through typhoons. This was something else entirely. As Haiyan approached the central Philippines, its eye was nearly perfect. A textbook catastrophic typhoon. Warm ocean temperatures had fed it relentlessly across thousands of kilometers of open water, and it arrived at the Philippine coastline at near peak intensity.
Tila ito na yung matamis mo ng bagyo dahil parang ang hangin dito ay para ka na sa loob ng washing machine, talagang paikot-ikot sa nakalipas na 30 to 45 minutes.
There was no weakening, no last-minute wobble away from land. It came straight in. In the hours before landfall, tens of thousands fled inland. But not everyone left. Some believed their concrete homes were strong enough. Some had nowhere else to go. Some simply could not imagine a storm capable of doing what the warnings described. The sea, on the evening of November 7th, was still calm. That calmness was deceptive in the worst possible way. At 4:40 in the morning on November 8th, Haiyan made landfall near the town of Guiwan in eastern Samar. The initial eye wall brought winds that stripped trees bare in minutes. Roofs became projectiles. Concrete walls collapsed inward. But the wind, as catastrophic as it was not the deadliest thing Haiyan brought with it. The storm surge hit Tacloban around dawn. 6 meters of seawater, the height of a 2-story building, pushed inland by the typhoon's winds and the shape of the bay. The Bay of Leyte is funnel-shaped, and it concentrated the surge directly toward the city. People who had sheltered on the ground floor drowned inside their own walls. Those who made it to their roofs watched the water rise toward them. Cars, furniture, bodies. Everything moved together through the streets in a single churning mass. The typhoon took nearly 3 hours to pass over Leyte. 3 hours of sustained winds that flattened everything the surge had not already taken. Entire barangays, neighborhoods that had stood for generations, were erased down to their concrete slabs. When the wind finally died and people climbed out of wherever they had survived, what they found was barely recognizable as the city they had lived in the day before. The scale of the destruction was staggering even by typhoon standards. More than 1 million homes damaged or destroyed across the central Philippines. In Tacloban, almost nothing was left standing. The airport terminal was flooded and gutted. The regional hospital was wrecked. Roads were blocked by debris, downed power lines, and collapsed trees. Communication lines were cut. For the first 24 hours, the outside world had almost no information from the city. More than 6,000 people were confirmed dead. Over 1,000 more were never found. Nearly 4 million people were displaced. The humanitarian crisis that followed was one of the largest in the history of Southeast Asia. Food, water, medicine, and shelter, all of it in desperately short supply across a region where the roads had simply ceased to exist. The international response was massive. Military aircraft from the United States, Japan, Australia, and others began delivering relief supplies within days. Aid organizations flooded in from across the world, but the need was enormous, and reaching isolated communities across the outer islands took weeks. For many survivors, the days immediately after the storm felt as desperate as the storm itself. In the years that followed, Tacloban was rebuilt. Slowly, painfully. New neighborhoods rose on the edges of the city. Homes went up on higher ground. The government invested in new warning systems, evacuation routes, and storm surge awareness programs. The word storm surge, a term most Filipinos had never heard before Haiyan, became part of everyday conversation. But Tacloban is not what it was. Thousands of families never returned. The lots where some homes once stood are still empty. And every November 8th, the survivors gather to remember. Not just the dead, but the hours before. The warnings that could have reached further, the evacuations that should have gone higher and gone sooner. Typhoon Haiyan was the strongest tropical cyclone ever to make landfall in recorded history. Sustained winds of 315 kilometers per hour, a storm surge up to 6 meters high, more than 6,000 confirmed dead, over 4 million displaced. Entire cities erased in a single morning. It was not the last catastrophic typhoon to hit the Philippines. It will not be the last. But Haiyan changed how the Philippines and the world thinks about what a storm can do, about what warnings mean, about who is left behind when the warnings are not enough. The ocean that Tacloban was built beside is still there. It always will be. The people who survived learned something that cannot be unlearned. That calm water and clear skies in the morning do not mean safety, that the sea does not announce what it is about to do, and that when someone tells you to go higher, you go higher. The storm changed the Philippines forever, but the Philippines is still here,